Hey there, everybody. Welcome to my channel, The Magical Solution. My name is Leilani. We are live here on Facebook and YouTube and Twitch and all the places, Tonight, I'm really excited, September 18th. I have a wonderful author. Her name is Lindsay Fauntleroy, and she is the author of In Our Element, Using the Five Elements as Soul Medicine to Unleash Your Power. I am so excited to have her on because she's what's the right word? How do I say this? She's amazing. She's a fun-loving, intelligent, beautiful being, and I can't wait for you guys to meet her. Before we bring her on, though, I would love you to know who she is. She's a licensed acupuncturist. She is obviously the author of In Our Element, Soul Medicine to Unleash Your Personal Power, but she is also the founder of the Spirit Seed, a school that offers personal and professional development courses that are rooted in ancestral understandings of health, humanity, nature, and the cosmos. Lindsay is a certified instructor for the National Certification Commission for Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine, as well as a facilitator for the Flower Essences Society Global Practitioner Certificate Program. Her approach to soul medicine emerged through over 15 years of clinical practice, doctoral studies of Indigenous and African Diasporic psychology, and her commitment to community wellness. Lindsay's 5 elemental flower essence remedies, the elementals, are all available nationally and internationally. And I will make sure to have her website and a link to her book in the comments below. Now that I've hyped her up, let's bring her on. Hey.
Thank you for that intro. Yes.
Finally, we did it. I am so glad you're on. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for saying yes to my request to be interviewed.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, this book
Seriously.
is amazing, and I want everyone to own it. So, but obviously, before we sport it, I want to get to know you. I want to get to know, your inspiration for wanting to write a book like this. Who is the person behind In Our Element?
Ooh, well,
Yeah.
where should I start?
I was born, and then
I was born in the Congo. No. Well, I mean, the question about why did I want to write this book, I think is one that's really close to my heart because it came out of 2 different things. One is that when I first learned about the 5 elements, I was so just in love with the theory. And I wanted to learn everything I could. And I started just, looking for books on 5 element theory. And all of the books that I found were very much more like historical texts. They were talking about um, kind of the history of the medicine and the clinical practice of the medicine, which is great. But my relationship with nature and life itself is a little more colorful and a little more vibrant. And I wasn't necessarily seeing myself in these texts. And then the other reason that I wanted to write this book is because I've been leading classes on flower essence therapy, teaching about the 5 elements, and people always say, "Well, where's your source book?" And then I would have to point them to these very somewhat dry textbooks, with some exceptions. There's some really, really, really great, beautiful books out there, so I'm not knocking them. But I wanted to write the book that kind of bridged that gap and brought this ancient medicine more current and brought it into the context of what it means for me as a Black girl that was living in Brooklyn and raising a daughter and grew up on hip hop. Like, I wanted that book to talk about this medicine. And so that's what I was hoping to do and set out to do.
You sure did. You sure did. And so that brings me to my next question. So, in essence, it's sort of like your workbook for the classes that you teach. It's sort of a compendium of all the different things that you had learned within the elemental works of Chinese medicine. and you're making it accessible to the average person, and
Right.
you've done a great job with that. And so with that said, why oriental medicine? Why not, like, what makes that over all the other ones? Again, for from a beautiful girl from Brooklyn with a kid, like,
Mhm.
why that? Why oriental medicine?
That's such a great question. I mean, one thing that I will say is that the way that I came to this medicine was through my own healing journey. And so the way that I found East Asian medicine, or the way that it found me, was when I was trying to get pregnant and I was told I couldn't have children. And
Mm.
it just so happened, I don't believe in coincidence, but my mother-in-law was a licensed acupuncturist, and she was one of the first Black acupuncturists. She studied at the Harlem Institute of Acupuncture with Matula Shakur, and
Wow.
so she became my first acupuncturist and really first teacher. And then another friend of mine was working with flower essences, and they both were supporting me in my healing journey. I was really deeply involved in African spiritual community. Within that spiritual community, we were learning about the five elements through qigong practices, and so that's how I came to the medicine authentically through my own healing. I saw the impact that it was having on my life, my body changing, my mind changing, my heart changing, that spiritual alignment. So that was my first really introduction to the medicine. Fast forward about 15 years, and I'm teaching a class for high school students in Brooklyn. And one of my
Wow.
colleagues is like, "Why are you using East Asian medicine with Black students?" Like, can't you find a, and there are so many systems of elements, Native American, African, all over the diaspora, right? And so I started looking into and doing research about the lineage of this medicine. And two things really stood out to me. One was that I came upon some research that talked about the migration patterns of the old world, and it talked about the similarities between East Asian medicine and the spiritual rites that emerged out of Nubia. So that was really
Ooh.
fascinating to me. And
Okay.
then the other thing that I remembered was, this must have been like 20 something years ago. I had my first Ifa reading, which is a divination system that is out of the Yoruba tradition, or the Ifa tradition. And in that reading, this was before I knew anything about anything. Like, I was really a baby, and I was just like, what am I doing with my life, right? Which is why people get readings. And so, and so the Babalawo told me, he said, he talked about my relationship with Oshun. And he said, Oshun governs acupuncture. And so you might be drawn to the East Asian arts in the future.
Ooh.
So this like, you know, I know that I feel a resonance with the medicine. I know that
Yeah.
it is one of the few. There are some, but it is one of the few indigenous medicines that's been able to stay intact in spite of colonialism, in spite of annihilation, in spite of all of those things. And so there's a resonance there, but I think there's also a history there that still needs some exploration and research. And so hopefully, if folks feel resonant with this medicine, it works, it's practical, that we can both look backward and really sink into the lineage and the roots, but also bring it forward into our communities as a source of healing now.
Facts. And I love that story. It was like all signs point to, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's like, go
You
this
were
way.
getting so many confirmations, just boom, boom, boom. So
Mhm.
it's amazing how life kind of points you in a direction and you don't realize until later. It's like all these puzzle pieces make sense now.
Yeah.
But to bring this medicine to, the urban West Coast, East Coast, world, I think is an amazing thing. And I think, when we think about elements, right? Normally you think about, your earth, air, fire, water.
Hmm.
If there's a fifth one, it's like it's spirit.
Ether
Usually
spirit.
that's what you see.
Hmm.
So the difference now with this is now you're incorporating metal and wood.
Hmm.
Now, a lot of times when you see those other, Western like elementals, it's medicine, it's spirituality, it's spiritual, it's all the different parts of a holistic practice. Does Chinese medicine also approach the elements that way too? Like, is it just for medicine, or can you use it, when you're putting your house together, or can you use it when you're advising your children at school, or that kind of stuff?
Totally. So they're absolutely archetypal energies. So when we're thinking about any of these elements, whether it's water, whether it's wood, whether it's fire, earth, or metal, the five elements in the system, we're looking at physical manifestation. We're looking at emotional manifestation. We're looking at specific thought forms. We're looking at personality. We're looking at all of the different ways. We're looking at signs. You can kind of look outside and see a signature of a particular element. Certain
Mm,
aspects of our experience are each within the domain of certain elements. So our relationships are within the fire element, our children and nurturing our children are within the earth element, our business and entrepreneurship in general, just being a boss, that's the wood element, right? So they are ancient archetypes that have manifestations today, just like any archetypal system. And one of the
mm.
things that I talk about in the book is that, every indigenous culture had a relationship with nature. Every indigenous culture's psychology was connected to nature. So the difference is that if I'm living in a desert, I'm going to have one relationship with the sun and with the fire element. And if I'm living in a cold climate, I'm going to have a different relationship with the sun and with the fire element. So none of the systems are wrong. They just emerged out of different cultures and different places, I think around the same time.
Yeah.
And so our the associations that they have with each of the elements is slightly different. They're naming them different, but at the end of the day, we're still looking at nature and we're still looking at the human psyche. So at some point they start to remix and dance together. But I just try to warn folks, like, don't try to impose this understanding of the elements on
Onto
this
this.
system, because you're just going to get confused, or you're going to start saying that something's wrong, and then that's not really what this medicine is about. But yeah, certainly they all have their spiritual practices. In
You
fact,
see, guys, that's why I always say context matters. When we talk about different cultures and we talk about different systems, people have an issue. They're like, oh, you're gatekeeping, or oh, this isn't this or this isn't that. And the reality is like you said, my relationship to the sun is going to be different from your relationship to the sun. But you know what? We're both still staring at the same sun.
that's
So it's
right.
okay. You know what I mean? It's okay.
Hmm.
The differences are contextual, they're cultural, and they
Hmm.
add to the tapestry of our experience. They're
That's
not
right.
meant to be dividers, you
That's
know?
right. That's so beautifully
And this
said.
is like, this book also really, really, I know exactly which part you're talking about too when you actually talk about that. And it's such a good book, because you also bring into it the emotions, the psychology, the effects on the body. Like, you really go, like, it is truly a medicine. Now, am I allowed to cheat a little bit and
Hmm.
ask, like, what does each element, like, what part of the body, or like, how do you know you have an issue in a particular element? If you don't mind,
Oh,
if I'm allowed to ask that.
you are allowed to ask. It's a long answer. Is
Okay.
that okay?
Of course, we got time.
We got time. Okay. So the way that I guide folks through the book into thinking about which element is up for them. And I just want to add this little sidebar that in this philosophy and in this particular approach to the medicine, you are not an element. You are all of the elements.
Okay.
So you have all of the elements inside of you. You have access to all of the elements. You might have an affinity towards one or another, but you still have access to all of them. And so the translation of five element, when you look at the actual word as it comes out of the philosophy, it actually is five changes. So Wu
Mm,
Jing means five changes, five transformations, five cycles. And so that's the way that I approach it in the book. It's an exploration into what phase are you in? Which element
yes.
is alive for you right now? Might not be that element for you forever and ever, amen, because the nature of life is to change.
Beautiful.
And this system is really the science of change.
Oh,
So that's what I'll start with as my little like caveat from your question.
I love
And
it.
then I think about this question in terms of the subtle body and the four layers of the subtle body.
Okay.
So just briefly, we have the physical plane, the emotional or the etheric plane, the mental or the astral plane, and the spiritual plane.
Yeah.
And so in the book, I guide you through this self assessment of each of these planes and what might be the element. So, just to give you an overview, when we're talking about the physical plane, that's of course your physical body and your physical symptoms. But also, when we look at indigenous medicine, like the physical plane is also what is going on in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're beefing with your spouse, if your compound burns to the ground, if everybody
Mm-hmm.
in your family is getting sick, all of that is the physical plane. So your
Mm-hmm.
circumstances are also part of if your money ain't right, physical plane. So the
Yes.
first part of the inquiry is what's going on in my life? What is feeling stuck or blocked in my life as I look out? And there's like a little assessment looking at your love, looking at, I always say money and honey, looking at all the things that make up your life and seeing like what feels like it's not really quite doing what the rest, one of these things does not belong here. What is not
Right.
working for me?
Or even a combination of.
Or combination of, right? It's like this and
Yes.
this. Like everything is good except for these two things or these three things. And so that's the first step. Step two is looking at the emotions, right? And so what is the emotion that comes up when you're thinking about this circumstance? Is it fear or a variation of fear, anxiety, shyness, trepidation? All of that is going to point you to the water element. If it's
Mm,
mostly anger or frustration or feeling stuck, that's going to point you to the wood element. If it's feeling like disconnected from joy or maybe even feeling a little manic, it's going to point you to the fire element. So I look at each of those emotional complexes for each of the elements. And, there's a little place to say, okay, this is the spectrum of emotion that I'm tending to default to.
mm.
Even when things are great, I feel anxious. Or even when people are nice to me, I'm a little agitated. That's when you start to know that something's a little off.
Crazy.
And then the third one is looking at signatures, and that's going to point to the astral plane.
Like
And so
actual like handwriting signatures?
no, signatures like signs, like the
Ah,
ways
the
that an
own moons and
element like puts
signs.
a
Yeah.
stamp on something. And so the
Nice.
signatures are going to be, each of the elements has these like certain ways that it shows up, like certain seasons, certain colors. And so I walk you through like what are some of the signatures of each of these elements. And then the last phase is looking at the spiritual plane or the purpose. So, what
Mm,
is your why? And so,
mm,
the why is, who is it that you are becoming? What are you awakening? What is healing within you that is driving you towards working in this way?
mm.
Because at the end of the day, it's not about, in my case, the fertility is what brought me to it. But in
Yeah.
the process, it wasn't really about me having children. It was really about what kind of person am I becoming? What am I learning through the process about trust and surrender and rest? And so that purpose question, that why is the gift of each element. And so that's the fourth step of the process, finding out your why, finding out what's driving you, what's your motivation. It's like the actors and they're like, what's my motivation here? That's your why. And so the elements each have a different why that they help us to realize.
Now is that's crazy. Now is there an equation that you do after you've done all the assessments? Is there like a final solution, or is it more like you keep them separated into their categories so that you can work on them individually?
Well, what's beautiful that I find is that as you're doing that assessment, people usually start seeing one or two elements that are like, that
You
keep
need
coming
you
back
need to
up.
work on me right now.
Yeah, because it's all connected, right? It's
Yeah.
not like these are separate parts of ourselves. It's like what's showing up in my body is showing up in my emotions, is driving me towards change. So it's like as people go through this assessment, they start to see one or two elements that are like right here, me, like you keep
Right.
circling stuff in this element, You should
Yeah.
look at it. And then I always tell people, don't read the book cover to cover. Just flip to the chapter of what you're working on. And if you got wood element stuff, just skip to chapter 4 and read chapter 4, and that's usually how it shows up. And then sometimes it's like, I don't know about anyone else, but I can do all the math. I can do all the calculations, but then something in my heart is like, it's not that, it's this.
Mm.
And so it's also trusting your intuition. You can do all of the work, all the assessments, you can check all the boxes, and still your heart is like, go here. So then I
Yes.
say, just, it's like an exercise in listening to your heart. Your heart knows, or we would say in African spirituality, your Ori knows, your higher
Ori
consciousness knows. You
knows.
just, follow your inner knowing.
Yes, yes. And I will say, when you were talking about, whatever issue you might be dealing with, just skip to that chapter. I also have to vouch for that, because this book is very readable as a whole, but it's also very readable in separate chapters. Like, each chapter you could go off and write a whole book on that particular element or that particular thing. So it reads very much cohesive but yet separate. And that's really, really good. So
Mhm.
now that we found what our issue is, right, and what we need to
Mhm.
work on, do you have in this book solutions to the, not solutions, because obviously the issues are going to be very specific, but do you have exercises or ways in which you can empower each of these elements within you, or strengthen the four bodies utilizing these elements in your book?
I do. So the prescriptions that I offer in the book, there's a few. I call these soul first aid because they're cheap, accessible. You can carry them with you. You can even get on a plane with them. Um, and that's what I feel like this medicine is meant to be. It's meant to be medicine that we can work with and walk with in a very practical way. And
Yes.
so there's a few things in there. The first is, for each of the elements, they each have what I call soul lessons. So it's these like 3 or 4 truths that these elements teach you. So the first aspect of it is bringing awareness and self-reflection to the lessons that these elements are teaching. So for example, for the metal element, we're moving into metal season in a couple of weeks. One of the soul lessons is that you are precious. You're
Mm,
precious, and so the reflection is around, where are the places and spaces where I don't feel worthiness? Where are the
mm,
places and spaces where I'm not affirmed in my greatness, either externally or internally? So that's going to be one tool for working with the elements, just that self-reflection and getting really honest and up close and personal with your inner world and with yourself. The next that I offer are yoga poses.
mm.
And so I have pictures of the meridians in East Asian medicine and different yoga poses and affirmations that you can do to bring that consciousness of that element into your body, because that's where this knowledge and wisdom lives. It's in our
In
bodies.
the body.
And so I've been a yoga teacher for a number of years. I get really excited about yoga sequences. In the book, it's just like, take one pose. Just do one pose for a few minutes a day. I call it your morning quickie. And that's it.
I
Again,
love
has
it.
to be practical. We're talking about practical,
Yes.
accessible medicine. So when you're working with this feeling of unworthiness, we're going to look at where that lung meridian lies in your body, and we're going to give you one pose to do every morning to
Mm,
remind yourself of your worthiness. And then there are flower essences. So the flower essences are homeopathic medicines that you can take internally. They're not essential oils. So anyone who's thinking about their lavender or whatever, it's not that. No shade to the lavender essential oil, but it's not that. So essential oils you take internally, and they are the consciousness, the higher consciousness of a particular plant. And so, for example, you're working with worthiness, you're in the metal chapter, you're reflecting on your value and how you show up in the world, the people around you. You're doing your little yoga morning quickie in the morning. And then you might work with a flower essence like buttercup or
mm.
sunflower or any of the flower essences that I list in the book that support us in awakening our internal greatness and standing in it and shining in
Yes.
it. And then the last tool that I have in the book is my favorite, which is the music.
Yeah.
So I have my Music is Medicine playlist that are the soundtracks for each element. It's a list of songs, some old school, some new school, some in between, mostly hip hop, R&B songs that bring us into the energetic of each of the elements. So you've got music, you've got flower essences, you got yoga, you've got self-reflection in your journal, and this is just a springboard. You can layer
Yeah.
on other wellness practices on top of any and all of these things.
Yes. Two things I want to compliment you on, because I was actually going to ask you, working with the youth, high school, how can these practices be applied to someone who's having issues of, let's say, the teenage love life,
Mm,
or, whatever the youth, go through these days. And you answered it by offering so many different varieties. And what I like about these varieties is that they hit every sensory level. Like, you have one that
mm,
hits the body, one that hits, the ears and the sound, one that hits this, one that hits that. And I think that holistic view, again, just works so beautifully with everyone, and especially with our younger crowd. Because the one thing I will say, I myself also work in the school systems, is that they perceive the world more sensory than I've ever really realized before. Like,
mm,
you and I grew up, and it's like, yeah, sure, we had toys and things that we played, but it never really occurred to us that the sensory stuff about it meant so
mhm.
much until we
Right.
get older, and then we smell something that reminds us of the smell of a doll that we got for Christmas.
Yes.
And you're like, wait a second, that meant something to me. But like, these youth are very much aware at how much their senses mean to them, and I think that these exercises are really, really helpful for that. So kudos to you on this one.
Thank you. One of the things that I talk about when I do professional development trainings for teachers, I work with a program called Inspiring Minds New York, NYC. And so, the limbic brain for teenagers is the part of the brain that is most in development
Mm.
during those teen years, adolescent years. It's the limbic brain, it's that fight or flight, but it's also our emotional impulses. So teenagers are very in tune to energetic currents, right? And so that's why you can walk in a room as a teacher and they can not be feeling you before you even open your mouth, because it's your
Yeah.
energy, right? They can tell, they can feel, they're intuitive in that way. And so this work really lands really well with teenagers because it's giving them language for what they already know. They're already sensing, they're
Yes.
already perceiving, they're already kind of organizing these energies for themselves. And now they just have a language to put on top of it. And it helps them to not feel like they're making it up, not feel like they're not understood, because there's a language for it, there's a lineage of it, and that lineage is really theirs anyway. So it's that
Exactly.
reclaiming of it as well, that it's just I really a lot of the songs that are in the book, I'm not gonna lie, came from some of my high school students.
Yeah.
Because I live under a rock. I was like, I don't know this song. And they were like, well, what about this? And then I listened to it. I'm like, that is the metal
Yes.
element. It's going in the book.
That's beautiful to include them that way. That must have felt so empowering to know that they're part of a published book. That's amazing. Yeah, exactly. Stephen writes here that we have to learn from kids. You gotta love it. You gotta love
That's
it.
right. That's right.
And another piece of this book that I think, hold on, let me just kind of fix this little piece here, is that so you discuss Eastern medicine, and the beautiful thing about this book is that it actually sticks to the thing. Can I
Mm.
just say that I appreciate that so much as a reader, because nothing bums me out more is when I see, like, a specific topic or the title of the book that says this, but then they incorporate this practice and this practice from over here and this practice from over there. And it's just like a modge podge of just new age practices. And I'm like, wait, weren't we talking about this thing? And your book is like, look, we're going to talk about the 5 elements from Chinese medicine, and that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, and like the exercise, that's what we're gonna talk about. And I appreciate that so much. It sticks to it.
Thank you. Thank you. And it really, I mean, this medicine is old and vast and deep. And,
Mhm.
I kind of see my work as just like kind of a chip on like this big iceberg of deep and vast and medicine that has so much integrity and so much history. And so
Mhm.
thank you
Girl,
for
it's gonna
saying
be the
that.
new wave. It's gonna be the new wave.
I hope
Seriously,
so.
because you know how like the spiritual community goes through these like 10-year cycles of like whatever. So like in the early 90s it was like Wicca because of the craft, and then like after that it was, hoodoo or whatever. Then came the ATRs, this is gonna be the jumpstart right here to all the youth running to Eastern medicine and Eastern mysticism and all that fun stuff. Because, I interviewed you, I've interviewed amazing authors, Benabel Wen, I've interviewed a lot of people who focus on Eastern medicine. And honestly,
Hmm.
it should be something that we look at and really take seriously, because our healthcare
Hmm.
system is on another level.
It is.
It
It
is.
is.
So, you know what? Maybe this is the next trend, and maybe I would love to be up there in the head with you, you
I
know?
hope so. And I also hope, the tendency when indigenous medicines come into the Western world is that they lose a lot of their spiritual underpinnings.
Oh, you ain't kidding.
And so, as an acupuncturist, this I've experienced firsthand. It's like, a lot of times what insurance in the healthcare system will cover for acupuncture is things like back pain or neck pain and those kind of more physical conditions. And acupuncture is great for those things. It is. It really is. But, I don't want the spirit, it is inherently a spiritual medicine because it comes out of a time where the body and the mind and the spirit weren't separated as they are today.
Facts.
And so, one of my mentors, Lori Deshar, who actually kind of introduced me to this approach to the medicine, her book was called Five Spirits. And she looks at the psychospiritual traditions within the medicine. And
Mm,
so I'm hoping that my book carries on, that foundation of reminding us that, we can bring in acupuncture and it can become mainstream. And it is more and more becoming something that people have their acupuncturist, just like people are starting to have their astrologer, and I'm for all of it.
yes.
But let's also remember that this medicine is not something that has to be commodified and stripped of its essential nature. And
Mm,
so remembering that when we're talking about these elements, we're not just talking about like it's really funny um in Western medicine, a point will be called something like GV20.
mm-hmm.
GB20, governing vessel 20, it's like the address of the point. And then when you look at the actual name of the point, it's called the 1000 meeting points. And it's the
Mm,
place where all of the meridians meet together and join and work together. So that poetry and that spirit and that beauty, like if we can hold on to that as we make this medicine more mainstream, that would be my big dream.
Yes. Oh my, I was literally just having this conversation with my husband yesterday because we were watching an old-timey, real old-timey Indian movie from like India,
Mhm.
like a Bollywood movie from like the 70s. And he kept pausing the movie going, "No, that is not the translation." And then he would tell me exactly what they were saying. And it was so poetic and so beautiful. And you're just like, oh my God. And they reduced it down to this one sentence that did not capture at all what they were saying.
Yeah, the
And,
essence.
yeah, the essence of it. So you're right. It, oh my gosh, it adds a whole nother poetry in and of itself adds a whole nother level,
Right.
to it. Oh my goodness. We got Steven here. I love it. How we can navigate that in low income or impoverished communities with little to
Mhm.
no access to this medicine and can
Mhm.
really benefit from it. So that's
Yeah.
actually a question. How can we do that?
I think that's a big part of the accessibility piece with this medicine. There are a lot and growing still acupuncture clinics that are offering community acupuncture. Again, coming out of the example, I should say, that was set by the Harlem Institute of Acupuncture when it was founded back in, I want to say, the 60s or 70s. very largely connected to the Black Panther movement. It's a part of the history of the medicine that does not get talked about.
Yes.
But that lineage, that history of bringing the medicine to the people, right?
Mm.
And so, how do we do that? And part of the way that we do that is by teaching each other how to do this work, right? So, I'm an acupuncturist. I love when people come to see me for acupuncture. I love when people come to see me for consultations for flower essences. It's great. And also, some of the stuff we can do on our own. Some of
Yes.
these points we can learn how to massage on our own. Most of these herbs we can, in terms of flower essences, we can use on our own. And so it's that teaching that is a part of the sharing. And when we look in the medicine, there is a history of the education and the healing being interconnected, right? It's teaching people how to be well so that they don't get sick in the first place, right? And so, but I do think we have a long ways to go, Stephen. To your question, we do have a long ways to go in terms of accessibility, and even I think seeing ourselves in the medicine. I think we have a long ways to go, which is why I was so adamant about the meridians and the pictures of the book being illustrated on people who look like me, people who look like my
Yes.
clients.
It's
Um,
so true. I gotta try and pull them up right here. It's so true. The pictures. Oh my gosh. But
that's
yeah,
one of
that
my favorite things
accessibility.
about the book because I know that I tell the story about when I started my clinic. Oh,
Oh,
you got a
oh
picture.
no, my
Can we
thing is
see
not
it?
letting us. Oh, because of my background.
I
Damn it.
might have one. I can do it.
But it's true. You have like these yoga poses, and you can tell, even though the pictures are in black and white, you've managed to put in, yeah, the
This is
different
our,
hairstyles and the different,
yes.
like, you can tell that these are beautiful people of color, and the braids, and it's awesome.
That was super important to me because, and I can tell the story when I first started my practice back in 2009 ish. I had mostly images of people, my friends, and stock images that looked like my friends. And I remember a woman called me and she asked if I treated white people. And I was like, of course. Like, why wouldn't I? And she said, oh, I didn't know because I didn't see any images of white people on your website.
You
And
see?
that just threw me off because I'm like, well, I never see images of black people, especially in the wellness industry. It is a very white, the holistic industry, the alternative medicine is very, it tends to be very white, though that is
Yes.
starting to change. And so we tend to think that it's not for us.
Yeah.
And so part of, I think, the work around accessibility is showing ourselves in that work. When I started my practice, there was a study by the I want to say, I can't remember the name of the company that had done the study, but it said that African American women were the least likely to access alternative medicine,
Mm,
but we had the most prevalence of some of the degenerative diseases that
mm,
acupuncture can support, like lupus, who I lost a best friend to, like breast cancer that I lost two aunts to,
mm.
and on and on and on. So we have these illnesses, but we're the least likely to access the medicine that is supportive of undoing the damage of the trauma that is living in our bodies. Why
Yes.
is that? So there is a lot of work that we still have to do around that. And I'm really actually grateful for social media in that regard because it is starting to shift and starting to
Oh
change.
yeah, and it is a beautiful shift. I am
It is
loving all
beautiful.
these queens coming out doing their magic, whatever that looks like, whether it's singing or makeup or this or that. Like, they just doing the thing, and I
And the
love it.
memes, I'm like,
Yes.
yes, God, let me go get my life together. It's good.
But you bring up a really good point. The imagery, the symbols, seeing ourselves in the imagery and seeing ourselves in the symbols matter. Like, the whole debate with the Little Mermaid and all that. Like, it's about symbols. It's about, seeing yourself on screen.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Once people start seeing that, they'll believe it's for them. And it's
Yeah.
amazing to me that that a white woman would ask you that. Do you serve? Because they've been the norm for so long. So now when they don't see their image, they truly do feel like it's exclusatory,
Right.
whereas the rest of us is like, we're so used to not seeing our image, like we just know, look, a doctor, we're supposed to go to them, okay, but we'll never be in their pamphlets, we'll never be, I get it. So yeah,
Right.
no,
It's
I
true.
found that interesting. That's crazy.
Yeah, I think back on that, I'm like, what is, and the other thing that I think is part of that, which I think you're raising up, is that it's not just seeing black and brown people, because sometimes there's like a black or brown person in the pamphlet, right?
Right,
But not accustomed to seeing a majority
right.
and not thinking that it's exclusive, I think is something that is like, huh, I think that's
There's a
interesting.
gathering.
Yeah, and then is it just POC? And maybe it is, but does it have to be? I ran into the same question when I was shopping my book to get published, and
Mm,
this question of who has the right to be an authority on this medicine.
mm,
And so the question comes up around like, well, you're a wellness expert for Black women. And it's like, well, no, I'm a wellness expert because I'm a wellness expert, you know?
right.
And so, so these are the questions that we have to navigate as women of color that, that you don't have to navigate if you're not.
It never gets brought into question.
Right. Right. Or who am I talking to, or who is my work for? I mean, my work is very grounded in Black and brown communities because that's the work that I come out of. But this healing and this medicine and this magic is for all of us. We all have this stuff that we got to fix if we want the world to get better.
Exactly.
So it's just an interesting question. I don't really have answers for it, but it's something it's one of those things I'm thinking about, like,
Mm.
interesting.
It's the next thing. And I have to ask, when you were really engaged in learning your Eastern medicine and learning from very renowned people, was there ever a moment where you felt, um, and this is personal, like you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but you know how we were talking about context of who is it for and who are you writing
Hmm.
for and what is your expertise and all that. Have you ever felt, um, what's the right word, separated from the rest because you yourself are not Asian, learning an Asian medicine? Did you ever feel different?
I can't say that I did, only because, ironically, the school that I went to did not have a majority of Asian students or Asian teachers.
Wow.
So that is, I mean, there were a few schools that I applied to that were taught in Chinese, and those places I felt like I don't know what's happening here. But the school that I went to, and I think largely a lot of the acupuncture schools that I see, and this is an interesting question, are not, at the time, the student body isn't predominantly Asian.
Wow.
Um, and so I didn't feel excluded in that way.
Right.
And also, as I've been immersed in this work and study, I've also been in my own spiritual practice and spiritual community. And so I've always felt like I've had a place to kind of come home to. And
Yes.
because the philosophies are so similar but not the same, but resonant with one another, I've always kind of felt like I'm stepping into a place where I can recognize it, but
Yeah.
also stay connected to my own lineage.
Oh, see,
Um,
that is so perfect that you say that. And because again, that is another thing that I think people don't understand. When everyone is running around, speaking appropriation and calling people out for,
yeah.
learning something that they shouldn't be learning or whatever, it's I feel like it's coming from a place of not knowing who you are. And
Hmm.
so therefore you get upset when others are engaging in things that they're not, nor like you wouldn't normally see someone engaging in. It
Yeah.
might be because they are rooted in who they are. They know they can come back to being who they are. And I
Right.
think that that's a beautiful thing. I think that's so, so beautiful. And do you mind me asking, are you also part of the African diasporic spiritual traditions too?
I am. Yes.
Yeah. So like the technologies, you're right. Very
indigenous
similar.
healing technologies. Yeah.
Very, very similar. And here's the truth. The truth is that when it's right, it's going to be the same across the board.
Right.
If
And
something is true, it'll be across the board.
it's true across the board, and I think the blessing that I've found in this medicine is that it did not suffer the colonialization or the African slave trade that intentionally destroyed it. So the medicine is able to stay intact so that I can learn it in its origins,
In
right?
its entirety.
Where
Yeah.
is that's not so much the same for the African healing traditions that are part of my lineage. They were disrupted, they were shapeshifted so that they could survive. They were, it's a different historical relationship with the medicine. And to your point about appropriation, because it's like, who does have the right to learn or teach something? And I think the question that comes up is the integrity.
It's the integrity. Yeah.
And so, am I trying to take something, claim it as my own, and pretend that an entire culture didn't exist? Or am I paying homage to and honoring that lineage as I stand, like, as you said, grounded in my own lineage,
Yeah.
and look for, again, the similarities, the resonances, the places where they each kind of, as they live in me, they inform each other. So I understand a little bit more about the I Ching the more that I study Ifa and the Odu, for example. Like, they are a resonance and of shared philosophy. And so, just like we were honoring, my relationship with the sun is going to be a little bit different from your relationship with the sun, but we're looking at the same sun. That's
Yes.
kind of how I feel as I study these traditions, um, including Native American traditions and their systems of the elements and connections to nature. And now in my studies, I'm looking at the world of depth psychology,
Mm,
and there's resonance there. It's like, wait, all the stuff that you're talking about is the stuff that we do.
exactly.
So
Exactly.
just looking for those places, and hopefully being part of that body of research and exploration, and staying with the integrity of it all.
I love it. Beautifully said, Rob says. Beautifully spoken. So
Thank you,
true.
Rob.
Stephen had commented earlier, and I think this was a great comment when we were talking about you working with the youth.
Mm,
He also, and having the accessibility, he also mentioned the young men, actually, that tends to be an audience that isn't targeted for
mhm.
these types of conversations.
So true.
Have you seen any in your work? Do you find that to be true as well?
I do. I find that the holistic wellness industry, as it's starting to shift, there's a lot of conversations about Black girl magic.
Yes.
And so there's like an in for it. And there is starting to be a conversation about Black men and therapy and Black men and emotional wellness. But it's not as common. It's not
Mm.
as much at the forefront. I had a friend that told me when I was talking about my practice, and he said, you should just set up shop in a barber shop. And I was like,
That's
I
a
need
great
someone to
idea.
exactly. I was like, I should, because
Yeah.
it's like meeting men where they are.
Yes.
Um, and so I was, I'm still marinating that idea. Actually, like, how do we reach men, young men? I think that when I first started doing the work in the schools, it was through like a women's program, a women's rites of passage kind of program. And I was using the elements and that sort of thing. And then the director, Katrina of Inspiring Minds, when COVID hit, she was like, wait, we need this for our young men. We need this for our young women. The conversation about being non-binary, like, this is not a gender specific conversation. Emotional
Right.
wellness is for all of us. And so she really extended the program so that it could reach all the young people in the
Oh,
program. So that was, I think that's how we stand in leadership around this work.
that's how we do. Meet them where they are. And
Hmm.
also too, I think there is something to be said about healing the women, first, just
Hmm.
because we give life. And so if nothing else, we can at least pass that on to the next generation of but
Mhm.
definitely meeting the men where they are, the ones that are here, because that is
Mhm.
important. I love that the barbershop, the basketball court, I mean, all of it. Yes, 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 yes,
We have my little acupuncture in the back corner of the barbershop. I was
yes.
like, "That could work. That could work."
So we have 5 minutes left, and
Oh.
I need to ask. I need to ask you on behalf of all the audience here tonight, and all the people who are going to be watching this on replay. Do you have any last words, any words of wisdom that you'd like to drop, either about your book, about you and your life,
Hmm.
just anything you'd like to say to the audience who might be interested in this work, or interested in possibly taking your classes? Just anything.
I would say, um, take that first step and then make it your own.
Mm,
So I think the book and the classes and the things that I offer are an introduction. And then from there, see what resonates with you
yes.
and do that. And then also pay attention to what else shows up. Because what I find on this path is that you take one step and things start finding you. The healers start finding you, the community starts finding you, the practices. So it's just, take that step, see what finds you, and make it your own.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Tell everyone, do you have any upcoming classes? How can people reach you? Or is there possibly even a new book that you're thinking about in the future?
I've got
Tell
20
us.
books in the background. But right now, you can find me at thespiritseed.org. We actually have a class coming up that's part of our certification program, but it's open for everyone who is interested in learning about five elements or about flower essences. It starts on October 16th and it goes into May of next year so that you can embody each of the elements, see how they're showing up for you. And we also have a scholarship application that closes on October 3rd. So if you're interested in taking the class, please visit the Spirit Seed to learn more about the class, about the book, about our
Yes.
community, and hopefully we'll stay in touch that way. And you can also find me on Instagram and Twitter at Lindsay Faunt.
Yay! Lindsay, thank you so, 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 so much for coming on tonight. The wisdom that you bestowed upon us all has been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This was way too much fun.
Good. That means we're just going to have you back.
We'll do it
That's it.
again.
That's
That's
it.
perfect.
And a huge thank you to all of you guys who showed up tonight. Let's do a shout out to Russ, to Tina, to Dominic, Steven, Rob, Omira, all these people, Renee, Sonia. Thank you guys so much. And of course, all of you who will watch this on the replay, thank you so much. And most importantly, this is how we grow. Enjoy your Sunday night. Bye, guys.
Bye.